one of the chief architects of the October the 7th attack, dead in the rubble. The broken body of Yahya Sinwar, killed in an Israeli attack in Gaza, a large open wound to the head, wearing military fatigues. Fitting perhaps for the man who planned the attack that brought the Middle East to the edge of all-out war. 2 other bodies were found in the rubble with Sinwar, along with identification documents, cash and combat equipment. One of the most striking details, the IDF did not know ahead of time that Sinwar was in the building. There was no advance intelligence. It was described as routine activity targeting Hamas. The unit that carried out the attack were trainee squad commanders. When they went through the rubble, they discovered Sinwar's body. This afternoon, Benjamin Netanyahu's office contacted the families of hostages to tell them that none of their loved ones still being held inside Gaza were in the building with Sinwar. The fear was that at times he had been in the presence of hostages serving as human shields. A mother of one of the hostages as news came through this afternoon.
We have settled the score with the arch-murderer Sinwar, but now, more than ever, the lives of my son Matan and the other hostages are in tangible danger.
In February, the Israeli military released this video purporting to show Sinwar inside a Hamas tunnel in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza. One of Israel's most wanted men had commanded his ever-depleting ranks throughout the last year, was in indirect contact with the countries mediating a possible hostage and ceasefire deal with Israel. In August, Hamas announced that Sinwar had been appointed as the group's political leader after Ismail Haniyeh died in a targeted killing in Iran attributed to Israel. So, when it comes to Hamas's leadership, who's left? In July, Israel's military carried out an airstrike in the safe zone of al-Mawasi that killed 90 people. 2 weeks later, it said the head of Hamas's military wing, Mohammed Deif, was the target and that he'd been killed. In July, Hamas's political bureau chief assassinated in the Iranian capital Tehran. Ismail Haniyeh, the organization's most senior figure, killed by a concealed explosion in an apartment. And now today, the man who took over and whom Israel holds most responsible for the October the 7th attacks, crossed off the list. There are others, more may emerge, but as far as Israel's concerned, the upper echelon of Hamas is now decapitated. The reaction in Tel Aviv was muted. What would this mean for those still inside? How would their captors react? In Gaza, some of the population ground down by the war are not only blaming Israel for their plight, but Hamas as well. Reaction to the news of Sinwar's death? Just stop the war.
We are urging for the war to stop. We are not asking for them to assassinate this person or that. They have assassinated most of our leaders, and the war has not stopped. We are calling for the war to stop.
The big questions now. What will Sinwar's death mean for how Israel continues to prosecute this war? And with more than 42,000 Gazans dead, will it have been worth it? In the last hour, Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the people of Gaza directly, and his message to them was this: if you're holding hostages and you let them go, we will let you live.
This is an important moment in the war. We will continue with all our strength until all your loved ones are brought home.
This will be unfolding in lots of different ways over the coming hours and days, but perhaps the people watching what happens most acutely will be the people of Gaza, and in particular North Gaza, Jabalia, that giant urban refugee camp northeast of Gaza City. Again, strikes there over the last 24 hours, scores of people killed.
Porrick in Haifa, thank you very much indeed. Well, the war in Gaza is just one of the many wars engulfing the region. Today, the fighting in southern Lebanon claimed the lives of 7 Israeli soldiers killed by Hezbollah fighters. American B-52 bombers hit Houthi targets in Yemen overnight, and the world is still awaiting the next installment of Israel's and Iran's exchange of ballistic missiles. Well, let's go to our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum in Beirut. Lindsay, try and put this into context. What does the death of Sinwar mean for all those wars that I just mentioned in the entire region?
Well, a lot depends on what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decides to do next. The Americans will be putting a lot of pressure on him to, as they put it, take the win. In other words, to move over to a diplomatic track in order to try and get the hostages released and to bring the fighting in Gaza to an end. But if the past is any guide to the future, he and his hardline cabinet are unlikely to want to do that, and there was no indication of that in the statement he made tonight. Then it also depends on who takes over as the leader of Hamas. One possibility is Khaled Mashal. Now, he is a long-time senior member. He lives in Qatar. He is seen as less extremist and hardline than Sinwar. He is somebody who the Qataris have a lot of influence over, and he might move to the diplomatic track and to try and do something to release the hostages. The whole region depends on what the leaders of Hamas, the new leader of Hamas, and Benjamin Netanyahu decide to do next.
And presumably that new leader of Hamas would also potentially have a target on his head, something to consider if you're going for that job. Just where you are in Lebanon, the fighting there seems to be getting worse and worse, also for Israeli soldiers.
Absolutely. And Hezbollah has been clear that they will not cease fire until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. But at the moment, what's happening is that there's fighting down on the border in the south. It's intense, we're told, although we have very little information. And in the last 24 hours, at least 96 airstrikes by the Israelis over the southern city of Tyre and that region and further south as well. And in fact, since that number was released by the Lebanese authorities, there have been reports of more airstrikes. And as you said at the beginning, don't forget that Israel has not yet responded to Iran's missile barrage the other week. The danger is that even if there were a ceasefire in Gaza, that the wars across the rest of the region are gaining their own momentum.
Indeed. Lindsay Hilsum in Beirut, thank you very much indeed. Well, Miri Aysin is a retired Israeli Defense Forces colonel with a background in military intelligence. Thank you very much for coming on the program. I wonder if you could just fill in some of the details that we're still missing about how this operation actually came to be today in the killing of Yahya Sinwar. I mean, we've heard conflicting reports. One was that they acted on intelligence, the Israelis, and the other one was that they actually just stumbled across him in this building.
One of the things about this war is that it's a combination of all of the above. When we look at what Israel has done against Hezbollah targets up north in Lebanon, everybody sees a lot more the direct correlation between intelligence and the action. Inside the Gaza Strip is made up out of, aside from the 2 million people who live above ground, Hamas built underground those hundreds of miles of subterranean tunnels. And what the IDF has been acting inside for the last year almost is in slowly and systematically trying to dismantle and blow up the underground tunneling system, which is only for the Hamas terror fighters and for Yahya Sinwar, amongst others. So in this case, it was what you would call the systematic common going into trying to find both the terrorists themselves, the shafts that open down and under. And again, this is basically in accordance to what's been come out until now, is that they viewed terrorists inside a building, fired at the building. When they went inside, they found the three people. One of them was Yahya Sinwar, and thus ended Yahya Sinwar, who pretty much for the last year was subterranean underground. And you ask that question, and I go, 101 hostages. And I know that that's not the subject of the day right now, but that's the subject of the day in Israel, because the implications of Yahya Sinwar being killed is the opportunity to open up the door to the end of it, not just for the Palestinians, and my heart can go out to them, for the 101 hostages that Yahya Sinwar was holding in the Gaza Strip.
Okay, but we've always been told that actually, you know, he would surround himself with these hostages, or some of them, as a human shield. And does it surprise you that there was no evidence of these hostages in the place where he was killed?
If you remember, around a month ago, 6 hostages, one of them an American citizen, Hirsch, Paul, and Goldman, were executed by Hamas 24 hours before Israel arrived at them. And it was very near, at least according to the reports that are coming out right now inside Israel, that it was very near where Yahya Sinwar today was killed. And I don't know this. I am just saying right now in the speculation that those 6 were near Sinwar. And I think in its own way, as I look at that, that's to me the opportunity today, meaning he was such a hardliner, he preferred to execute those 6 people rather for Israel to get to them. And today he died as he died without hostages around them. But that was part of that aspect then. So I take it one step at a time. There's still 101 there. We need to find them as well.
But what about the opportunity of... But what about the opportunity of scaling down the fighting? Because the Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, told your nation tonight that the fight will continue until all the enemies of Israel are wiped out. I mean, first of all, how many enemies is he talking about? And secondly, if this was such a milestone, then surely this could be an opportunity to scale down the fighting in Gaza.
One of the interesting aspects is, as I was watching the clips that you were showing there, is what I watched here and what you chose to show right now, because you did not show the full clip of the Prime Minister. You did not translate.
We don't have the time to do that,
especially when it's Hebrew. Hostage families. You can put the whole in that sense. I am not a supporter of the Prime Minister. This is not about him. This is about the heinous attack of October 7th, 101 Israelis who were there. And, sir, at this stage, the Hamas right now, not led by Yahya Sinwar, can bring the 101 and the war is over, period, and done. And it's as if nobody wants to say any of that, that the 101 hostages that have been held the whole time are a non-issue. I disagree with you. That the fact that Hamas...
I never said, hang on a minute, I never said they were not, I never said they were a non-issue. I never said that. I spent a lot of time with these families. I was in Israel last week. I went to, a number of demonstrations in their honor, in their memory. The argument, the question rather I have is this: where's the political solution to this? Because all wars at the end of the day have to have a political settlement. I see no evidence of the government, your government, thinking about that.
I think the government is thinking about it, and I may not agree with a lot of what they think about. I also think that I need to acknowledge as an Israeli and the world that what kind of resolution do you want me to arrive at? It's set for some kind of end of fighting, okay? This isn't peace. I can't do peace with somebody who calls for my annihilation. So I absolutely agree with you that we need to arrive at an end to this horrific war. And to me, that comes with 101 Israelis who come home, because in the meantime, Hamas have never changed what they say. They say it openly. Hezbollah says it openly. I don't know how to resolve that. I'd like to see the world call them out more in that sense on why are they calling for our annihilation. This isn't about the Palestinians. I feel that I, Miri, have done more to help the Palestinians in my lifetime than the Hamas have ever done, let alone Hezbollah or Iran. To pose it as being about that is a challenge.
We're going to leave it there. Miri Aysoon, thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, Israel's Prime Minister has called Yahya Sinwar's death an opportunity for the people of Gaza to free themselves from the tyranny of Hamas. And US President Joe Biden echoed this. He has just called it a good day for Israel, for the United States and for the world. And he added that now is the opportunity for a day after in Gaza without Hamas in power. But who exactly was Yahya Sinwar? Harry Fawcett takes a closer look at his life and his role in Hamas.
Long before the attacks of October the 7th last year, Yahya Sinwar was at the top of any notional Israeli target list. A former internal enforcer, a former prisoner in Israel, since 2017, the head of Hamas in Gaza. Born in southern Khan Yunis to Palestinian refugee parents, he was 25 at the time of the first Intifada, or uprising, in 1987. Recruited to the newly formed Hamas, quickly becoming its chief enforcer, punishing, killing Palestinians suspected of collaborating with Israel. In 1989, he was convicted by Israel for the abduction and killing of 2 Israeli soldiers and the murder of 4 Palestinians. He spent 22 years as an Israeli prisoner, even giving interviews in fluent Hebrew. Studying Israeli society, media, politics, the better he had it to attack and undermine them. His then interrogator telling us today that he was never in doubt about the threat he posed.
I'm really glad that he's dead, because it's very important, and believe me, I know him, to the whole world, not only to the Israel state, to the whole world, because his dream was to kill Israeli Jews and infidels. That was his big dream.
In 2011, he was one of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners released in exchange for the captured Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. Doctrinaire, long opposed to the Oslo peace process, with the aim of eradicating Israel and reclaiming all of Palestine, he established himself as a chief strategist, boosting ties with Iran. In 2015, he was defined by the US government as a specially designated global terrorist. His seniority within Hamas was cemented in 2017 when he became its Gaza chief, changing the power balance in favor of its military wing. The same year, Hamas issued an updated charter suggesting it would accept an interim Palestinian state alongside Israel. Sinwar entering into what some saw as an unspoken arrangement with Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel allowing Qatari funding for Gaza in the hope of containing Hamas and maintaining the division between it and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. But as October the 7th proved, and his speech nearly a year before it suggested, Sinwar was still planning a major attack.
We will come to you, God willing, in a roaring flood. We will come to you with an endless number of rockets. We will come to you in a flood of soldiers without limit. We will come to you with millions of our nation, tide after tide.
With the Al-Aqsa flood, as he called last year's attack, killing 1,200 Israelis and capturing 250, Sinwar dealt Israel a military humiliation and a deep psychological wound. But it also brought an unprecedented Israeli response, laying waste to Gaza, killing thousands of civilians and destroying much of Hamas's military capacity and now all of its top-level leadership.
Well, earlier I spoke to Mustafa Barghouti, a politician in the West Bank who's leader of the Palestine National Initiative Party. And I began by asking what changes he thinks Sinwar's death might bring.
Well, it doesn't change much, except that it takes away from Netanyahu more arguments about why he should continue this war. He used to claim that he is continuing till he kills Sinwar, until he occupies Gaza. Now he's done all of that, but he continues the war and even expanding it. So in my opinion, that will show that Netanyahu has no reason whatsoever to continue this war. On the other hand, I think what happened today will not change much for Hamas or for the Palestinian side, because Sinwar is not the first leader who's assassinated. Haniya before him was assassinated. Nasrallah was assassinated. This never changes the determination of the Palestinian people to struggle for their freedom.
Right, but we're also getting reports from inside the Gaza Strip, credible reports, that many people, including some Hamas fighters, are celebrating his death, albeit behind closed doors.
I doubt that very much. I would not believe such reports. Probably they are coming from Israeli sources or sources that are loyal to Israel.
They're not actually. They're from Palestinian sources.
Maybe, but I think that does not represent the opinion of the majority. The people of Palestine will see him now as a hero. He was not hiding in tunnels, as Israel has claimed. Actually, the one who's hiding in tunnels during his meetings is Netanyahu, not Sinwar. He was fighting, and he was killed in a fight with the Israeli army, and he was dressed in a fighting outfit. So he wasn't a coward. This man spent 22 years in prison. His main goal was to release the Palestinian prisoners in every possible way. And I don't think the Palestinian people will look at him in any other way but as a hero who struggled for the freedom of his people.
And yet it is inescapable that if he had not masterminded the attacks of October the 7th, which killed, 1,200 Israelis, then Gaza would not have lived through the hell that it has been living through for the last year.
Gaza was in hell before the 7th of October.
But not like this. This level of destruction.
No, wait. You mentioned 1,200 Israelis killed. But you didn't say that Israel killed 52,000 Palestinians.
We mention that all the time. But the point is, I don't think you can argue with the idea that if it hadn't been for October the 7th, the Israeli reprisals, brutal as they have been, would just not have taken place.
Of course I will argue, because 7th of October was not the beginning of the story. Since '67, Israel imprisoned more than 1 million Palestinians. We are under oppression. And that's why 7th of October happened. You could ask the question in a different way, I suppose, which is if Israel ended its occupation, would we have had this war? Of course not.
In the last month, they have killed the head of Hamas, the political head of Hamas, the head of Hezbollah. I mean, militarily, Israel is picking off one enemy after another. Does that weaken the resistance to Israel significantly?
On the contrary, it makes people believe that Israel understands only the language of force, and it makes more people, especially young people, determined to struggle for their freedom. Because what does Israel offer to people after killing the leaders? Nothing but occupation. And that's something people cannot tolerate.
What is your appeal to the Israeli Prime Minister tonight?
I don't appeal to Mr. Netanyahu because I don't trust him at all. I think this man is behaving as a fascist leader. But I appeal to the Israeli public. It's time to stop this terrible genocide. It's time to stop this war for the sake not only of Palestinians, but also of Israelis.
Just finally, what do you think will happen now to the Israeli prisoners, they call them hostages, in Gaza?
Well, I hope, as I said, Hamas will not disappear because one leader was killed while he was fighting. I think there are other leaders that will take his place. And the matter is in the hands of Netanyahu. If he wants them safe, and I don't think he cares about them, by the way, but if he wants them safe, he can immediately engage in true negotiations to achieve ceasefire and then exchange of prisoners, and then they can come home safe. This whole dilemma could have been easily avoided had Netanyahu accepted ceasefire in the first month of this war.
Mustafa Barghouti, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.